We all know that increasing bike power is key to cycling performance, but we also know that being more aero is key to going faster on a bike. How does that work then? Being more aero often results in less power, but being more powerful often results in being less aero. You can see my problem. I think it's time we find out how you find that balance for optimal cycling performance. Well, to do this, we've come to see world-renowned bike fitter and physiotherapist Phil Burt. Now, Phil has actually worked with some of the best cyclists and triathletes in the world, the like of Sir Chris Hoy, Bradley Wiggins, the Brownlee brothers, Alex Yee, Non Stanford, the list goes on. Now, I've heard that Phil isn't afraid to buck the trend or rip up the so-called rule book when it comes to bike fitting. So I'm intrigued to find out how he tackles this aero versus power debate. And I'm a little bit scared myself because I'm actually going to be jumping on with my bike and getting my own position scrutinised. Well, Phil, thank you for joining me today. Power versus aero. I'm sure this is something you've dealt with quite a lot over the years, I'm sure, yeah. It's something I've obviously played around with myself. I've gone for, in the past, I've slammed my position. It's obviously made me super aero, but I've lost power in doing so. But I guess the trade-off of that is that by making myself more aero, I maybe don't need as much power as a result. But if I come up in my position, I'm less aero, might be able to produce more power, but a lot of that power might be lost in trying to overcome drag. So you can see my issue here. What is the answer, or what would you suggest to people?
Well, you're absolutely right, Mike. It's that how to square that circle, as it were. You know, so as per usual, with anything related to bike position or setup, is that you change one thing, and that might sort one problem out, or or make you more powerful, make you more aero, and then it causes other issues elsewhere. So the way I look at it is tend to come from what I call the three pillars of fit. So what I tend to look at is power is obviously very important to any position, aerodynamics, and then comfort, or as Dave Brelson used to make me say, sustainability. Because, you know, if you said to me, I've got to ride 100 miles on this, I'm much more thinking about, well, how do we get to the end of that in a sustainable way where you're producing enough power? But you're absolutely right. You don't want to be wasting any energy pushing wind that you don't need to. So the way I would look at that is through those three prisms of it and balancing out. And I think for a lot of people, what they should consider first of all is a very low-hanging fruit is, well, make sure you're pedaling hard first, because there's no point being aero unless you're going fast. You know?
Yeah.
So and there's a number where you get up to a certain speed, aero becomes 1-for-1 with power, you know, but that's pretty quick. So let's go quick first, and then worry about making more aero and pushing less air.
Okay, interesting. I mean, it kind of sounds like a bit of a dark art, so I'm quite keen to actually dive into this a bit more, and I am going to be the guinea pig. I'm going to jump on the bike. Please go easy on me with my position, but rip it apart, but sort of run through what you would do and what you would suggest for, you know, anyone out there watching when they're sort of trying to tweak and find that balance between power. Well, let's jump on then.
Should we do that? Come on then. What size feet are you?
11.
Jesus, that's big for your height. So, Mark, the first thing I'm going to look at first of all, right? We're going to capture some data first of all, because objective data always helps us understand what really is going on. But obviously, I'm looking at you as well at the same time. And the first thing to say is this isn't like a car crasher position. But I think what we're going to look at is what can we make better? What can we polish? Yeah, crank length, saddle height, saddle choice. Yeah. First thing we're going to start with though is this back end here, right? And what I call the engine room there. And I think if you just turn the pedal around to the bottom, right, on this side. The big thing about a time trial bike, most people forget, is it's an inline seat tube post, which means, unlike a road bike, your hip is much further forward and right over the bottom bracket here. Now, that basically means we can start to really generate some big power on the bike, all right? It's biomechanically more advantageous. Let me explain that in one way, right? If you sit up a minute, right? Imagine I'm here and I put my hand down there and I say, you can stomp on my hand, all right? You'll hurt my hand, but you're not going to break a bone, yeah? But if I stand here, put my hand directly underneath your heel and say stomp down at it, you're going to really hurt my hand. You might break something. That's because your glute max, biggest, strongest muscle in your body, is extending the hip and can get into it. So first and foremost, what I'm going to look at is this optimal, yeah? And then we'll move to the front end, okay? So do you want to start pedaling? Let's get some data, yeah? Righty, so. Yeah, there we are. So There you go, Mark. There's your position. That's me getting in the way. There's you. Now, when we look at this here, right, green means you're in the normal range for what Retool thinks is the right for a time trial cyclist. And hey, presto, lots and lots of green, you know. But as I always say, I don't fit to numbers. What I'm more interested, yellow means you're just outside. Things, for example, like you mentioned to me, having relatively short legs, long torso, maybe the reasons for that. We've got loads of data. There you are cycling. So what I'm going to do, lovely knee trace from the front as well, very straight up and down, as we expect from the pro that you are, you know. The first and most important number is knee extension. That's just sitting actually a little bit tad low. The number's coming out there just on the outside. Now it's inside, you know. And if we go down here, we can see other data. So back angle's 15 degrees. So really slammed, Joe. It's not lower than the sort of range of 18, but I would say that's okay for someone like yourself who's trained at the level they have, you know. So in no way you're sitting up, you know, knee forward of foot's really quite good, not the 51 or too far back. And then beautiful knee trace here, near travel, tilt and lateral travel. That's how much your knee moves in and out like that, you know. So we're more on the tilt and then how much it moves in and out. Just shows you that I think speedpay pedals are working really, really well from you. So you biomechanically, not wasting. Do you know when you see somebody whose knees are coming way out to the side, it looks like they've stolen the bike or it's too, you know, bikes. And your hip vertical travel is relatively minimal. So this isn't bad, you're fairly solid on this bike, you know. I think what we want to look into, I'll just stop that a minute and capture it. The only thing I would do, I think, do you feel this? I mean, your saddle could go up a little bit.
So, I've played around with this a lot over the years, and every time I go up, I feel like I produce less power. I feel nicer when I've got like a little bit more flex in my knee.
Right, okay.
Weirdly. I just feel like I've got more power, and I don't know why, and I've never been able to kind of figure out why that is, but yeah.
The big thing is, how do you feel when you get off this and you start to run?
Fine, my only thing, my thing right now is I just feel like it's, I'm a bit cramped in, like I'm trying to fit particularly at the front end, I'm trying to fit it.
Yeah.
I personally would like much rather be out here.
Yeah.
Right out and just sort of like resting into it a bit more.
Yeah. Because you mentioned beforehand you're quite long in the torso, short in the legs. This is the medium frame.
Yeah.
So the medium frame is definitely working for your engine room in terms of achieving a pretty good saddle height and position. Yeah. I would put it up. You don't like that. That's absolutely fine. But I hear you on the going out. You probably, because basically that's where the bike industry makes bikes based upon normal distribution of anthropology. So your inseam being slightly lower means that the medium fits you there, but your torso wants the large. Yeah. So I completely agree. I can see how you want to just go out a little bit longer. Now, we might be able to look at those off-the-shelf versions of the stem that allow you to do that, because I think you got the room in terms of on the knee, or whether you actually went up to the large. The high hands position, if you go back down into that, that's working really well. In fact, I would say one thing you could look at as an alternative to that is going even higher.
Right, so like wedging myself
just in. Just wedging yourself in, because I think you could lock in and feel really fit. The one thing can I say what I don't like about it, right?
Yeah, no, please do.
And Mark's got some history. If you go down in there, what I don't like, top dead centre here, is how closed your hip is. Yeah. Now, you prefer sitting low, which is absolutely fine. So I would make a counter argument that, okay, we're staying in the same position, we're staying in that position, but whether the 172.5 cranks that you're riding at the moment are the same as your road bike. And the Phil Burt rule is I always go 5 mil less for a road bike if your road bike's optimal, yeah? If you think about it, it makes sense that the crank length will be more comfortable and more optimal if it's smaller, because the circle underneath you is smaller. Yeah. So we can get you there. And I wonder whether, I know you've tried it in the past, I think it would just open up your hip. That can really help with back pain, really help you sustain the position. The reason why it helps with back pain is your hip flexor muscle. It's two parts. Part of it comes off the lower back, so the bottom three lumbar vertebrae. So you know when you get off a long time trial, you're for a few minutes, you're a bit stiff. And a lot of people say—
I definitely get that. I do get that.
Well, that's the thing. I think if we had the opportunity with you, I think it's a great position. But then I would take your saddle height up, so your knee extension stays exactly the same now. So bottom dead center will come a bit closer, but we'll move you up, put you on smaller cranks. I reckon you'd feel more solid on that. And actually, if we follow up together and I can help you optimize that, put you in the right position, I think you'd feel more locked in on that position, The big thing for me is, if we go the hip flexor muscle comes off these three vertebrae here and down into there. So if me and you jumped in an old Mini and drove down to the Land's End now, right, in an old style Mini, 1960s, and got out, we wouldn't be surprised to be stiff, yeah? That's what I think about your hip position on this bike with 172R. So when you come to run off the bike, if the the psoas part of the hip flexor hasn't been as compromised and in such a tight position. What we find in 100% of the triathletes we look after, we looked after British Triathlon for 5 years, that they feel much better getting into run. They can get into it much quicker. So I'm not saying anything, but I don't think this is a bad position at all. I just think 172, it might be a chance to re-explore crank length to improve your performance on the bike and your transition into running.
So it's interesting, we're not necessarily slamming anything. We're not making it necessarily more aero in terms of kind of like the setup, but actually inadvertently I might end up more powerful and actually maybe slightly more aero.
Yeah.
Kind of weirdly. So I mean, like, I've obviously done quite well here and I'm quite relieved on my position. So I think I passed the test, did I?
Yes.
Passed the test?
Yeah, no, well, unsurprisingly, you're dead good.
There's probably a lot of people out there with very different positions to me. So what would you say for them with this kind of this balance of power versus aero? What's the tact for them then? Like, do they go for a really upright position? Is that so bad? No,
I don't think it is. I think what we have to do is come back to our principal thing is that when we sit down with any bike route, we like to understand the goal of the bike fit. So if you're doing a 4-minute pursuit, you can slam it. You can go dead high in the saddle, really low at the front because it lasts 4 minutes. As I said before, because power and aero are everything about that position, and comfort and sustainability goes down in its importance. But if you come into me and say, look, Phil, I'm transitioning from sprint triathlon to half Ironman or Ironman, at that point, the comfort sustainability pillar becomes much more important. And that's where I think a lot of people don't recognise that a stock bike will come with certain things. And if one thing you can notice in pros at the moment is that they'll manipulate crank length to achieve an even more aggressive position. What I'd say with normal people is I would manipulate crank length to take care of their sedentary lifestyles, meaning that they're not very flexible in their hips. Generally saying, if you drop crank length 5 mil, you generally open up the hip by 3 to 4 degrees. So that's a lot. That means you're not getting that really close position and you don't have to go as far down. So that's why it's so important to me. It also means that, when we do saddle pressure, which we'll do now, the peaks on the saddle pressure, you pedal like that, sometimes people have rocking hips. That often is a sign that the saddle height is too high, because you have to rock either side. But more often than not, it's not. It's because the crank length is too long, so they're having to absorb it one side and then go down the other side. So classically, on much smaller bikes, women often have 170 cranks, and they will make you move loads on the saddle. So the ordinary person, not just slamming it straight away, but understanding, have I got my saddle nice and high and quite far forward as well? Yours is here, he's a lot further forward than a normal saddle. And have I got the right saddle? Which at the moment, you've only just started riding this one, haven't you? But
I'm pretty comfortable. I was surprised how.
Well, the two things I like about it is that this particular saddle, you've got a cutaway there. So with men, that really helps with penile numbness. We tend to put a lot more pressure on the front. I think what we should do now is jump in and get some saddle pressure mapping and just understand where you are putting your pressure and whether that saddle's working for you. Should we do that?
Exciting,
Okay, let's do that. There we are. So saddle pressure is always really interesting. What you'll see in a road bike is a V of pressure here from the sit bones to here normally. But this is absolutely fine. This is for a time trial cyclist, right? So you're in the right position. You're rotating forward on your pelvis right onto the front, all right? And then you can see the cutaway of the saddle there, and then the two spikes here. You sit ever so slightly more on the right than the left, but that's all human beings are asymmetrical. So this is really normal for a time trial. But how important, you can imagine, the right saddle is. This looks all okay with you, but often you see down here, we can see a lot, some people have a huge amount of red, because all of a sudden, all the pressure, instead of being in all three parts of here, is all of a sudden all in one place. It's a bit like an elephant standing on a drawing pin. So all the pressure's going in one place, so obviously it goes up. Now, when we look at this, that shows you where you sit on the bike at the moment, rotate forward. So this turns to, have you got the right saddle? I think a gap saddle with a very soft nose front is often really important. Now, saddle width often makes a big difference on time trial and not the back, because we can basically see that saddle width to you is irrelevant because you're not even on it, you're on the earth. But saddle width for the front is very relevant. So, my general rule is about 50% of people like split nose saddles, and some people find them too wide, for example, and prefer just a more road-orientated saddle that has a good soft nose but wide enough to give them enough support. See how the width's important, because if it's too narrow at the front, the pressure's going to go up even more because it's having to go all in one place, You're really solid on here. Look at that dot there. It's hard. Believe you me, Mark, some people like this. And that's when for example, they might have the wrong crank length on, or they're very unstable themselves, or another fit parameters out, but you are rock solid. Now that's great, rock solid. dead aero. That's when, if you think about it, having the right saddle means even more, because you're in one place the whole time. So it has to work for you, you know? So I think the two things we should try are, is a planned approach to reducing crank length, yeah? And we change one thing at a time. So I wouldn't change the front end at the time. So you can compare apples with apples. That's the other big thing I'd say to customers out there is like, don't change everything at once. Because if you change your pedal system, your shoes and your insoles, like some fairly famous people I've looked after, then how do you know what's working and what isn't working, and whether one problem's been solved but another one's been created? So I think if we just, if you were to entertain changing crank length and trusting me, and then adapting your saddle height by the amount I would do, which is we would modify it for bottom dead center. So we take your saddle up the same amount, we drop it and just keep set back where it was. If we could do a 1-for-1 test, you could do a 10-mile, fit or something like that, and a 10-mile thing, and just tell me how you feel. Yeah. Because I think it'd be better. At that point now, I do reckon maybe angling the front end to see whether that gives you that feeling and give you a bit more space. You might be surprised because your elbows will go down and away a bit and your arms will come up, so it might give you that bit more length. If not, I agree. I think the only thing I would change is you just lengthen you out a bit, just because of your torso length. It just looks like you want a little bit more room, you know? So you're gonna be, do you often find yourself pushing yourself back on the saddle when it's like on this bike?
A little bit. I definitely, there's a lot of pressure through the hands, sort of just holding myself in place. Which sort of brings me on to kind of another question, because I appreciate I'm quite low.
Yes.
There are a lot of people watching that will be in a much higher position, less aerodynamic. Would we be advising them to get more aero? There's a lot to gain from their current position, or actually their position's sustainable, it's comfortable for 180k, and actually let's just leave them and make them more powerful?
Yeah, I think I would always edge towards, I think dropping the front end can normally make you a little bit more aero, generally most people. It goes beyond a point though, and I think you mentioned it when we were chatting off camera, you go beyond a point, you go so low that your head pops up, you know, so it's not ad infinitum. I think what you've got to come back to there is the 3 pillars of fit and the goal that you've got. So if you say to me, just doing a sprint triathlon, 10 miles, you can say, look, we can make that fairly aggressive, so it can be very low front end. I think what people often forget is we used to call it what I call earn the right to be aero. So in other words, if you have massive infant flexibilities, your neck's not very good at extending, your thoracic spine's not very appropriate, and your hips, then slamming your front end, don't expect that to be very comfortable. And the big thing is the false economy of being really low at the front and aero, but you're only in that position for 1 minute out of every 3, and you're moving in and out of it, because that movement in and out, I can tell you, causes more disruption to the airflow than you being in it for a minute. So it's that uneconomical lowering, if that makes sense. If you go back into position, I think what it's more about sometimes, Mike, is that you're an elite athlete, you're fairly comfortable keeping this hip fairly closed, yeah? We can open up the hip by bringing the front end up, or we can open up the hip by dropping the crank length. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if you come up with the torso, that opens up the hip, and the hip is happier, generally more comfortable, less low back pain, less hip tightness when you get off the bike. So I would say if someone's got a fairly, it's not stupidly high, not stupidly low, but they're having those problems, I would manipulate crank length, because we know, in itself, it's more aero because you've got a smaller little circle of aero, but it allows you to maintain that nice, steady front end. But if you put a gun to my head, if someone had a fairly high end front position saying I'm going to do 180k, I keep that the same, because I think for them to work on themselves to make that more sustainable and comfortable is a hell of a lot of work for them and might not be achievable. And I would concentrate on, let's make sure that you're producing 95% of the power that is absolutely possible all the way around, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
To go. So it's that balance. It's like when power drops, because power drops off as well when your hip gets too closed and we can't achieve that position. We can't get that great high and forward position, or you're moving right. That power drops off. Then aero starts to become, its factor goes down.
I've also seen people that are actually So I'm in the base bars now. Then when they get into the aero bars, they're actually higher.
Yeah, which is. Yeah.
But is there a benefit to just being in the aero bars generally? Just a different position, being more comfortable, even if it is higher?
Yeah, so I think that's a really, again, super good point. Is that in those longer events, and the trend is I see now is people are doing longer events, you do see people have aero bars even on gravel bikes sometimes, and on road bikes for things like RAM, So I think sometimes it's about coming into here, you're using a completely different set of muscle groups in the upper body. So it just gives your arms a rest from being locked out in that base position. So often people are switching between the two to just give themselves a bit of relief and then relax and come back into it. So sometimes I think we have to consider this. We call them aero bars, but are they more sustainable for a very, very long distance. So, and you can look at that, you know, famously, Schwimmer's neck is the name of the guy who basically.
So when you're...
Yeah, so basically, if you look at time trial, the hardest thing, if you ask me, but I don't, you look, is this, looking up the road, is all this neck extension. For example, if I just put my hands here, just give you that, see how much easier that feels? Because your thoracic spine is now in a different position. So thoracic spine mobility makes it, but let's face it, it's a bit like painting the ceiling for 2 hours. Now, if people go, oh, I painted the ceiling, and they go, oh, I got neck pain the next day, that can be the limiting factor, and it is the limiting factor, believe it or not. Your neck failing is more often the reason why people would not finish race across America, because the neck muscles just give up. So famously, they had very high front ends with these bars there where they were saving their neck. So yeah, I mean, if you're taking a neck problem onto the bike, or you know you're fairly inflexible, and I wake up with neck pain, then having a fairly high front end position is probably going to be more successful at delivering you to the end line with your neck not failing. You're going, oh God, I just can't take this anymore.
Okay, a lot to consider then. Well, thank you very much. Very, very, very interesting. Wow, what a brilliant day. Thank you so much to Phil Burt for his time today. I mean, in a time where we are so focused, or a lot of people are talking about aerodynamics and all the latest products and how you can get faster and cheat the wind, it's always quite refreshing to hear someone just going back to the basics and telling you to focus on your comfort and power before anything else. And yeah, it has got me thinking a little bit. And let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I fully recommend checking out Phil Burt. If you're in the UK, obviously, or international, you can also come and see Phil. So go check him out. Let me know, as I said, in the comment section down below what you think to this power versus aero debate, and comfort, so it seems. And yeah, if you enjoyed today's video, please do give it a thumbs up, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe.